Afternoon, everybody. I think everyone's on the East Coast here or close to it. If not, good morning. My name is Joe Kurlansky, and I'm the president of Monarch Information Security Consulting. And this is fifth in our series of CyberMD. I should be looking at this more closely. And we've covered contracts, we've covered scoping, we've covered system security plans. These are all up available on our YouTube channel if you want to go watch them. And now it's time we start getting into the actual practices and how we view these and how an assessor looks at them. Monarch Information Security Consulting is located in Portland, Maine. We are a C3 PAO, we are an RPO, we are also a licensed training provider. We have our next class coming up. So if you have anyone who wants to get it, become a CCP in August, and we'll be doing another CCP class in September, and then a CCA class also at the end of September and October. So we're starting to line these up pretty quickly as things are certainly heating up out there. We are also have the benefit of having today, we are up to 4 CCAs on staff, as one of our team members actually passed the CCA exam yesterday and has already cleared all the background skating bit in this thing. So she's ready to go. And we have a 5th just waiting for the background skating. So we're pretty well positioned as this thing is getting ready to go live. Without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Mike Snyder, who's going to talk about CMMC Level 1 practices and access control. Take it away, Mike.
Yes, as Joe said, we are now on the CMMC, and we're going to start with the level 1 practice controls, requirements, whatever you want to call them, but ideally the practices for access control level 1. See if I can get it to, there it goes. Of course, with this, it's going to be the 4. They always sound very basic, but this is probably what takes the longest in implementation and documentation is these level 1s. Of course, no shock there. I'm going to be going over, and just like last time, I will save everybody the vernacular reading over the practice, but we all know they're all going to begin with AC and then .L1, but 3.1.1, then 3.1.2, 3.1.20, and then 3.1.22, which will take us all the way from authorizing access to looking at those functions and transactions, then external connections, and then going into what's allowed to be posted publicly and how are we controlling that. And then I'll go over some tools. Of course, that's probably my excitement for today. After the long, I think it's been 15, 20 years now of going through every CRM, you name it, different type of tool. It doesn't matter what it was really hard to find one that actually helped you prep for an assessment. Didn't do all the other stuff, and keep track of everything. We already have those tools built into our environments. I'm going to go over what's available, and then I'm actually going to go through some of the level 1 practices within that tool. And then I'll shoot you references like usual. We won't have many for this because we already have a guide that has everything built into it, and then questions at the end. And as Joe always tells you, I will not stay long-winded. 3.1.1, I'm going to kind of go over and try out how you should be looking at the guide since it doesn't really break it up somewhat well. I'm going to do that. And then after that, I'm going to kind of just push through the other 3 and give the highlights. So with that being said, beginning with AC.L1-3.1.1, which is our access control. And you'll notice the difference in the terminology, authorized access control. Most of us are used to seeing different things within 171. And I actually did it today, Joe. I did not let the person sit there. With that, I broke these up because a lot of the times when you go into this, whether it's the level 1, which if you saw in the first slide, I put which one do I use? The level 1 assessment guide, or do I use the level 2? They are ideally the same thing. They're both level 1 practices. However, if you were to go into level 2, it's going to say CUI. Hopefully when the rule comes out, you'll notice some of the changing of terminology and words, and then we'll see the level 1 in the new version will take away the NIST or CMMC identification and go back to the actual rulemaking and going into the CFAR and using the Bravo dot and stuff we've kind of been used to seeing with the regular contracts for FCI. But with that, I'm going to go straight down this requirement or practice objectives and show you the difference between it, because I think a lot of people get confused by why does it say, determine if? Well, if you're implementing, you wouldn't be determining, you would be actually creating this stuff. So beginning with that, I'm going to begin with users. And one of the biggest issues I think, Joe, almost any one of the assessors have already seen, myself, is when you get to an organization and you ask hey, where's your list of users? Everybody's like, oh, they're in Active Directory. And then my next question is, so somebody, the authorizing person, normally CEO, HR, somebody that's at that level in the beginning, or they're a supervisor there should be somebody authorizing it. They're not going into access control. There's going to be a list of people that are authorized, whether it's an email or something else. But most of us put them in our policies, or we have a separate like SharePoint somewhere where we're actually keeping track of everybody that has access to FCI or CUI. I wanted to use this one because when I built the course for the Cyber AB for all the registered practitioners, one of the biggest issues was most people don't categorize stuff by like your user FCI or CUI. You're a proprietary information, or you have like some high level access. That's really the people we want to see. And then you might throw in that extra jargon like I did here, where at the end of proprietary, I slapped on FCI and CUI. But in this case, if you're only doing level 1, you could just put federal contract information or whatever you deem that as. If you break up your data, you can make it very easy. But with that, the assessor, this is where it kind of like switches. So you, as the organization or the person developing the documentation and the process to actually authorizing somebody that access, crazy list, whether it's in your SSP linked to a SharePoint site or it's actually in your policy. Like this example is an actual policy. It's an access control policy with the list drawn out, has their titles, what they do, and then their role assignment or their privileged access assignment. You don't have to go nuts like I did here. For me, it's a preferred thing. If you're going to use Entra ID roles, it makes it a little bit easier for the rest of the practices if you're going into level 2. And even in this level 1, as we would go from 3.1.1, you could go right into 3.1.2, where you're talking about functions and how you're restricting them by using those, there's Lewis, and how you're actually using Entra ID roles, built-in roles, to control that access and limit the access. That's the key to this one as we would go into the next one. Practice. Of course, now switching, I could probably sit on there and talk about, the first 3, but the first 3 or the first, if you've heard me say this before, when you go through the practices, they're broken up. First couple objectives, which are part of the assessment, what the assessor is going to be looking for is going to be your documentation. Like, how did you implement this? What is the actual, details behind it? And then I always split them in half. So if there's 6, normally the last 3 are going to be the assessor actually verifying it or the organization verifying it before the assessment. So in this case, I want to point this out because I think some people go through it and then some people don't. There's this whole prep for the assessment, but did you actually go in and validate every user, or do you have an automated tool that goes through? Most of us know how to use Entra ID if you have it fully set up. It's very good about auditing people's roles, and then you can do your own audit reviews and set up, time periods and watch that person. We have 2 Lewises today, the ghost of Lewis and Lewis himself. But with that being said, I bring this up because a lot of the times the one group that is left off, and the one I've highlighted on the slide, is the actual access to that restricted data. A lot of us don't consider that to be a privileged account or, something that is really separated. You create a group, you throw people in there, and then let them manage, access to SharePoint or wherever they're kind of file sharing. Or say for documents, we're all used to a safe, a filing cabinet that locks up, but here we're treating the digital world the same way. Is who's in control of that, and do we actually have them in the right groups? And if you're doing this process of like validating who owns the group and who's controlling it, you'll notice the assessment goes a lot smoother. And you put some of for everybody that's watched me at a university, I know Joe got to see me. I think Joe and John were doing the same thing during that assessment, is if you put the ownership on the actual owner of the data, or the person that's supposed to be managing access to the data, it takes it off your IT department or your cybersecurity department. Yes, we have some, background tags as the custodian of, the privileged access management suite, whatever you're using, but we're not controlling who goes in there and all the access requests. We may know the process, we may be part of the process, but we're not owning the process anymore. So I like to bring that up. And then just kind of moving on before I do my usual and way over talk it, I jumped over just so everybody's like, hey, what happened to the processes, acting on behalf of an authorized user? They should be the same as your users, but they're going to be those service accounts that are either default or you created. Normally in my examples, or when I do a full class, I like to bring up the service accounts that we create that do stuff in the background. That Microsoft's like, hey, you need to create this user account, or a third-party app needs to do something and it needs that privileged access running on a service account. You make sure they're labeled and you understand what they do. There's no definition, there's no requirement of how you need to label them, as long as they fit your scheme and you can actually identify and show that they were authorized, by the person who created them. That person went through the process. But other than that, I would expect to see a list just like we saw with the users. I normally put them right below or within that same place. They're all privileged users, just one service accounts. It's a process running in the background. But moving on to the devices, I want to show this using the process. Most people use an email system or some kind of automated tracking system. Whether you are addicted to Microsoft, which I would say I'm a little bit when it comes to Azure, I like using the automated like HR, automatic enrollment. It kind of lets the system work. But if you don't have that established, most people are going to use emails. Those emails can show your process. So think about that through the assessment. If you show us that, in this case, somebody wanted to buy a printer, they asked the IT manager, and the IT manager approved it. If it's somebody else that needs to approve it, we would expect to see that. Based on whatever your policies and your other documentation say. Remember, it's level one. We wouldn't expect to see stuff. And of course, Mike's focusing more on level two. But even at a level one, you want to have these authorizations for access control. Who's actually the approver? Know who they are, and it will save you a lot of time and energy of people always asking for stuff and wanting to put stuff on the network or a network that has federal contract information. Okay, so moving right into our 3.1.2. Lewis, did you have something on 3.1.1?
Yes, I do. So if you have a user listed for a level one, and you do a review, they're going to have, at least at a university, access to resources that are outside the scope of the data research or the research that they're doing. Is that going to create any kind of issues?
No, so I would tell you from experience, for level one, it really wouldn't matter. You're going to be more in probably level two because of the data you actually have. But even at a level one, the principle is the same. No matter what the scope is for FCI or CUI on the level two, we're looking for those controls that are in place for access for either FCI or both FCI and CUI. So
okay,
we only need to see those security groups that are controlling the access, to the data or those environments.
And do you include the groups that a person is in your, say, we create a user inventory? Would you include that information specifically, or would that be something that should be drilled down to or kept track of separately?
Yeah. So which I think I'm about to get to in the next slide, is showing that.
All right, I'll shut.
You're good, because I think this is a good point with not reinventing the wheel. If you have a simple policy that says, we maintain our list of users based off of this, and that takes me to like a list within Active Directory, but they're inside that group. It says these groups, and you have them defined, but you have a link, showing, hey, if you want to view these, they're here, which controls, if anybody got your SSP, or it's supposed to be a high level overview. It does not need to have everything in it. But if you want to use your SSP as like you heard me say before, like a catalog or a reference source, you don't have to put all that information in there. You can lead the assessor and walk us like, hey, we don't have, this 100% valid list because we use Active Directory or we use Entra ID, and it's an automated process. It goes from HR to this person, and all stuff runs in the background. As long as you can walk us through the process and show us the list of those security groups, nobody's really going to fight you on that as an assessor. The one thing we would be looking for is somewhere that it's documented what those security groups are and kind of the parameters around the groups. Who doesn't get put into? Thanks, Lewis. That's a good question, because I think a lot of people kind of go overboard and put too much in there, and we're expecting a lot of that on the assessment. So going back into 3.1.2, the requirement here is very simple. And if you were here at the beginning when Joe and I were talking, for access control or any other one of the practices in another domain, most of the time you do them together. And this is one of those where they kind of get slapped together. I'm not going to create a user account. And just what Lewis was talking about, I have like normally a cut sheet, or I have something that tells me if they're in this department or they're part of this research project or they're part of whatever, I know to add them to these certain groups. I know that they have to have privileges to this. They're going to have access to this. And they're also going to have to be put in, these special security groups, whether it's, access to VPN, MFA, it's a list of stuff I need to do, but I have that drawn out somewhere. You can have it in the policy, you can put in your SSP, but the idea is that you have it defined ahead of time. And then when it comes to the assessor looking at this, we're expecting, it may be a list like you see over here on the right hand of the slide. You may say, okay, they're privileged and some of these people are administrative. They have roles, but they're not a privileged account. Maybe it's view only. I know I set up like my security people, like if you're a compliance manager or you're the actual like a security operations inside Entra, the first thing I'm going to do is whoever's the high level, like the top tier SOC analyst, they're normally going to be the actual administrator, but everybody below them only needs to have the next level down And if I can make it where they're not privileged, I'm going to review and then ask for, that permission or to see what's going on or hand it off to somebody. That would be the goal. But however you set it up, remember, these are not defined by the DoD. There's no way, shape, or form to do these. Just make them secure and what works in your environment. And of course, if you haven't noticed, I've been popping these up at the bottom because a lot of people I don't think get to the bottom section. If they do, they're probably in like round 3, 4 of revamping their documentation, going back through the different 171 versus CMMC and trying to figure out what the difference is. But if you actually read what the potential they just think this is what the assessor could ask me, which is why I always like to split the two up. You're just listing, what these transactions are, what the functions are, and then a set of people. As long as you know what they are and what they're supposed to have access to, we're not going to bother you. We just want to know what their functions are. We'll verify when we get there. Then that'll come to the assessment or assessor requirements, and they're going to go down and just see. I always like to tell people, don't go overboard. The way you look at it is normally the way the assessor's going to look at it. As long as you have definitions and defined parameters up front, we're just going to look over your shoulder and make sure you're doing it the way you say you're doing it. 3.1.20 is our external connections. And I will kind of say this multiple times. External connections is anything that is not, right? It's like I have control of them or they're accessible by my people, but they're not here on the facility. They're not mine. They could be like a lot of people are like, is my Microsoft environment an external connection? Hopefully not. Most of the time you have a direct linkage between your on-prem to there. We have some tunnels and some other stuff. However, with that being said, what could become an external connection is a direct link from and through a VPN from a remote work site. So me working at home, and now I'm trying to get back into the work environment. I created an external connection. Or you're sharing like an AWS environment for development, research, whatever it is. But it's managed by something outside of you, and it's no longer connected directly. It's not like your Microsoft environment, depending how you have it set up, can actually manage that AWS environment. It's two totally different environments. Go ahead, Louis.
Sorry, Mike. So let me.
I know you're going to have a lot here.
Yes. So I want to clarify this. Even if you're an employee and your system is managed, the minute it's attaching through a remote connection, even a VPN tunnel, that is now considered an external system.
So think like personal device or I haven't hit the mobile device yet, but and thanks, Louis. The idea is like that external system is something you can't most likely control. You don't have the security. You may be able to push, like a lot of us are used to like AUPs or external user agreements, anything that would go to there, but it may not push it. The idea is that you can't push every security requirement to that person or that device. Then it becomes external. It's also why I like to bring up AWS, because most of the time you could have your own users going to another AWS that's managed by another organization because they're on a project or they're doing something else. That's an external connection, even though they're using your computers. They're using your workstations, they're using whatever internal to you, but they are connecting to an external system that you probably are, like the rest of us, a little weary if all the security controls are in place. So you'd have the requirements of what they're allowed to do and if you want to open the connection in the first place. And then, of course, going to where Louis is at, I did mine this example down here on the right-hand side based off of 3.1.20 using a VPN. But what we saw during COVID, and it's still going on, is we didn't have workstations. A lot of people were using desktops. We didn't have laptops. So when COVID kind of sparked, just go home and we'll install some tools on your computer and you'll be able to remote into your own computer, or you'll be able to come into our servers. And that's the ones I would be talking about, Louis. Or you're having, for any university out there, probably the biggest, or research, the biggest part of the external connection is going to be that other university or college or researcher that is coming in and using your environment. They are an external connection. So there's some stuff you have to do to allow them into your environment. Or you don't technically have to, but I know a lot of you, if you're research or a university, like it's open, it's kind of open research, and that's the whole idea is collaboration. So they're structuring around there. And when we get to level 2, we'll talk about the additional requirements that need to be put behind there. Really, I just had to bump this thing. And then control public information in 3.1.22. This is probably easy. and yet hard at the same time because it's not managed normally by IT or the cybersecurity team or anybody that could really affect this. It's normally done by an HR or PR team. If you're in a big organization, if you're in a small organization, it's possible you are the person. You're the person doing IT, everything, security, and you are also managing what gets posted. But with this being said, you want to make sure that there is defined rules. What are you allowed to do and who is in control of this and what is the process required to ensure that we don't post on there and that we are reviewing those publicly accessible websites, social media, anything where information could accidentally get posted. And then I can tell you from the assessor's point of view, one of the things that always gets everybody is when you're doing level 1 and you're starting with this and it's really basic, it's just FCI. But what most people want to do is, hey, we got a brand new contract with the DoD. We're going to be making this, this, and this. And it gets published on social media, but who was the person that reviewed that? And who is the person making sure that nothing gets posted accidentally by another person on your public facing websites or LinkedIn, Facebook, you name it, one of the social media giants. But as long as you have a process and you can show that it's being reviewed and somebody's going through the process. Go ahead, Lewis.
Yeah. So
You're okay.
I'd like to discuss B, because procedures to ensure FCI is not posted. And you just mentioned who is responsible for reviewing. Let's say we have a researcher or a PI that's posting information or others on his team. Are we saying that someone needs to be assigned responsibility to actually review their social media content?
Yes, before it gets publicly posted.
Before it gets posted. Yep. Okay. So as long as there's administrative control in place that says before you post something, it goes here and you let this person know, doesn't mean we need to monitor their social media outside of that. Is that correct?
And remember, this is like most of us are going to have, from the user standpoint, like in an AUP, our acceptable use policy, we're going to say you can't post nothing about the university or anything you're working on. But however, they may want to post it like directly on your university's public media or wherever all the information is coming out, right? That should go through a process like whether it's your PR or it's some team should be reviewing that to make sure no contract language that is actually not supposed to be in public purview or that they're allowed to see it, without anything, it's just open to the public. Like Joe and I could go see something about your university's contract that really should not be seen by us. That's a process. Normally there's like 1 to 2 people within there, a primary and alternate that quick go through, make sure there's no language in there. It's high level, overview of the project. And if for you, like if before we get into the level 2, if it's CUI, that's where this really comes into play, is making sure there's no CUI contained. But FCI is the same way. You still got to make sure that, certain parts of that contract do not get posted publicly.
So we may have to modify any kind of policies or procedures we have in place to include instances of reviews for FCI. Thank you.
Yeah. And you're going to be looking for anywhere where it has that distribution statement where you're not allowed to redistribute it without going through the DoD.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. So changing things up a little bit, I'd like to bring this up. You probably heard Joe talks about it in the beginning, and then we talked about it on a couple sessions. But one of the tools that I think is probably the close to, I wouldn't say the best, but it is the easiest to use and actually covers all of the objectives. I mean, like down to asking you a question for every one of those practices, even for level 1, to ensure you don't miss something would be Catapult. It's free for level 1. I'm going to kind of jump in there, kind of show you what to do. But before we start, it's for everybody. I know when I first got here, I really didn't know about Catapult. I got into it and I was like, wait, like anybody could use this. If you're doing 171 or CMMC, it doesn't matter what you're doing. It actually takes you through all the languages. It's there. You can't really miss anything. But a lot of people always ask the question like, well, who is it really for? It's for anybody with a contract with the federal government. You can use this for anybody that has that requirement for 171, which will be turning into CMMC here in the very, very near future. I can't put out months or days anymore. It's good night with that rule. But either way, anywhere from the large primes all the way down to a small business, it's very easy to use. And then my biggest thing, I've been preaching it to the FFRDCs and our universities with the research center as well. Or you have contracts for anything, to develop anything at a university, or even we have a couple, I don't even know what the number is, Joe, but potential people, they're applying for contracts and they want to go through and start their process. And when I jump in, I'll show you the reason why they want to do it, because it does have some perks, unlike the other tools. And it was built by assessors that actually understood what you needed. So with that being said, I'm going to kind of jump over, switch my screen here for a second, then I'll jump back to the slideshow.
Mike, there was a question from Will Hassel about segregation of duties, and unfortunately, the timestamp on it is about 15 minutes ago, so I can't remember exactly. Will, do you want to just ask the question real quick and what that was in regards to?
Yeah. So Mike, I've heard you speak before, and I know you have a big push on kind of pushing things down the chain and out the door as much as possible. But as far as the allowance of access to the system, should there be segregation of duties in the review process, and how would you structure that to satisfy the assessor?
Yes. So you definitely want to do segregation of duties. Now, what I feel is the problem here is in level 1, you would have thought that would be a level 1 requirement because you're already talking about function and access control. Like, let's do a separation or segregation of duties. But most of us are going to inherently do it. But I think a lot of assessors have seen organizations where the assumption is we're only looking at FCI or CUI for this, but you're as a whole, your university or whatever your type of organization, you would split people up. Like you heard me talking about primary and alternate. I only ever assign a primary and alternate for a specific system or an environment, especially an Active Directory or by role. If you're using Enter ID, I'll do the same thing. There'll be a primary and an alternate. And if I need to, I will use some privilege identity management or access management, PAM, for everybody that's still on those local AD servers. But the ability there is I'm going to request it. I'm not going to have it all the time, and I'm going to separate people's functions up. You heard me kind of saying in the beginning, the access control really should go through the people responsible for the data. Most of the time that falls on HR to do the background processing, making sure, and then kind of going to the supervisor, or they hand it off to a supervisor of a project, a team, or whatever that actually is responsible for the data. And then it takes it off IT. And then IT gets that custodial role. They're more the curator of the environment. Well, we do have some, permissions to it, but we don't need to be managing files. We don't need to be managing folders. We're managing the overall access and making sure, audits can be done, whatever we need to. But yes, I would say the biggest thing is keep in mind that tier structure, like you heard me just go through for the level 2 assessment. For level 1, are you really probably going to do? You already know the people and who's responsible. I would assume you're going through and checking with the data owner, then the data manager, and then your custodians. But when it comes to level 2, and we'll get into that when we get into level 2, you're going to want to kind of walk through that process. A normal assessment is going to look something like going over the policies in your SSP, talking the high level stuff. You're kind of giving us everybody's names and what they're going to do by role. And then we'll talk to the IT department as the custodians, and we'll kind of work backward until we get to the person actually using the data. So if you follow that same fashion or even backward, it doesn't matter how you show it to us. The idea is that you can walk through the whole process of who's touching or using the CUI or FCI and the management process in there to actually protect it. And yes, I know separation's hard in some places. That you're going to have people that are on 2 or 3 different, I don't want to say controlled access, but they're environments that need specific privilege controls because you don't want people in them. But you're going to see certain ITs or different administrators have access to multiple. It's you building that least privilege, or did I put enough in here that person can't? I always like to give the example. I made the person a domain administrator, right? And then I told them, hey, by the way, you're not allowed to access any of this stuff. Well, they're a domain administrator. If they really want to, they can just go give themselves access. They're probably going to sign some stuff that should hopefully limit that. But it's also the thing, don't give everybody, domain access. Give 1 or 2 trusted people, and then everybody else would request for them to do stuff, or you would have to elevate somebody else's access temporarily if they needed it. Hopefully that answers it. I know we're going to talk more in level 2. It's really hard not to, Joe knows me, so, or anybody that's been on these, that I can talk probably for hours on just access control.
Thank you.
No problem. Okay, so jumping in here, on the first page, if I was to come back out of here and you go to sign up, I will sign up real quick. You can sign up for free. You can do level 1 for free. Joe is that giving. But it is neat to get your hands on and actually go through it. You click level 1 free. If anybody wants to follow along and just see what I'm seeing or create your own account so you can go back, after we're done with the session, feel free, or you can wait until afterwards. The links are in the slides, but you're just going to punch in your email, your company, and then password, and twice, of course. And then you're going to be pushed kind of like right into it. Now I'll sign back in so you can see where it takes you to. When you come in here, it's going to have this blank dashboard kind of walking you through the steps, but you just click begin readiness assessment. And this is what I really wanted to point out. As soon as it generates my assessment for me, but if it generated your assessment for the level 1 practices, everything we've been talking about, it breaks down inside each one of these practice groupings. So do you employ a provisioning process? Yes or no? It's really simple, like those lists and everything we were talking about. The one thing, and Joe and I and everybody here at Monarch, we do help people get through their level 2 assessments. If you have like an exclusion or you have some weird way you process it, like, yeah, we do, but it's not necessarily like this. We do these this way. It does have the option to do yes with an exception, because you may not follow the process exactly like it's explained inside the CMMC guide or the 171 alpha or the 171. But you can always shoot us a question like, hey, not really sure here, and we'll kind of lead you that way. Same thing. As you keep going down all these, it's going to ask you, if I hit yes, I like to always do these. One of the things I think that's neat about this, I didn't tell you anything about unique user accounts or IDs or anything, right? That's going to be ahead, but it's prepping you. Like, while you're going through this, we need to have these. Are you setting them up the correct way? And then you put your details in. But the one nice thing is that this is getting you into that, okay, in access control, I need to control this, and I need to be able to identify the people as well, which we're going to put in IA, which we'll talk about, I don't know, maybe 2 sessions from now. But the same thing, I could go down these. If you do have one that's no, the neat part is it's going to build a POAM for you, kind of build all this documentation for you so you can start planning stuff. You can also add tasks. If you know it's something you want to implement and you're just not there, you can add a task for yourself. And I think one of the neat parts for me is if I'm in with a client or I'm just playing around with this, if you build a task, it emails the person that you put on that task, and it starts annoying them the closer it gets to the due date. And then people actually get them done. I think most POAMs, that's the problem. They're in an Excel spreadsheet. Nobody really gets an updated anything. And then it comes to like, oh, it's 3 months past. Did we ever get this done? No. I was doing all this other stuff. But the notifications are nice. It keeps everybody on track. Then, of course, when it comes to here, you can either select the normal. Most everybody always has Active Directory, or you have some way of doing it. If not, you can put other and put your own. And maybe if I click on the right one, and then you're going to come down here. Now this, when you get to this box, you put in what you're doing. You can type out a statement. I'm normally going to, what you saw I had in those policies, I'm going to put the same thing. What is my actual process, or what is my policy for actually doing these? I require users to be put into whatever. You draw this out, and this is going to help build your SSP documentation, your policy documentation in the end of this. I won't go through every one. Of course, I try to be really crazy, but Joe would slap me then and tell me, you said you weren't going to talk forever. But the nice part about this one is it seriously does walk you down 3.1.1, 2, and then you're going to jump into 20 and 22. But it actually gives you the question from the assessor's point of view. That's probably the best part. And to me, it's in layman's terms. It's not the jargon that's inside the CMMC assessment guides. I know a lot of people ask me, and then I'd read novels on, okay, well, here it is this way. And you saw the breakdown on the slide, the way I separated, like, you should be doing this, but this is also for the assessor to review. Somebody internally, like your compliance team, can be the assessor, but the idea is you have to set it up first. Like I said, I do really like this. And this goes back to Lewis's question, like, do we have to have procedures? It does ask you, like, that is one of our requirements is, do you have procedures? What do you follow? And is repeatable? There isn't, I will tell you from experience. And if you've been through the guides and you've been through 171 or the 171 alpha, there's not a lot where it actually tells you, do they have a policy? Do you have a policy? Do you have a procedure for this? The inherent background, and most of you have probably heard this before, but that comes from 53 and understanding what controls are required to meet the full requirement for CMMC or 800-171. A lot of us kind of don't go to the appendixes, and it's because it wasn't blatantly spelled out to us in the beginning. I don't think it still is. And now with R3, a little bit better, but 171. But I won't, if you want to try it, feel free to. But like I said, I know I've told Joe multiple times, this is probably the close to the assessment questions, what one assessor is going to ask to help you prep. Then, of course, it does have level 2 if you go into there. And then the one neat part is if I filled all this out, you're going to have some documents up top. It will start filling out all your policies, and it will have your system security plan. And then those plan of action and milestones, if I was to mark something no, and then I can put it, it'll kind of build my plan of action and milestone. Those tasks will go on there as well, since they are technically part of your plan of action and milestone. I could talk about these things forever. Go back to my slides so we can get into questions. Of course, like I said, you can go sign up, play around with it. A lot of people do. I think then you get hooked. It is definitely one of the better tools. Can't say best, but it is. The resources are pretty simple for this module. Once we get into level 2, you'll notice it's a little bit different. There's also, that's one of the key features of Catapult, is that all the resources are outlined by practice. If everybody remembers, CMMC version 1 used to have a ton of resources down below. The good part is Joe and them did not strip that stuff out. There's also additional guidance. I almost called it suggestions, but it's not suggestions, but it's guidance to help you get to that point. If we all kind of get it, the CMMC assessment guides are a good start, but most of the time they don't get us to where we need to go. And of course, I purposely put this here because I figured somebody was going to ask about it. Level 1, it doesn't matter, level 1, level 2. Most of us are going to go try to find some information, and you're used to going to 171. For level 1, there's no requirement. It is seriously the FAR. Those 15 are really what we're stuck to. And you can even see in the rulemaking process, they have gone back to creating an assessment guide that is only based on the contractual requirements for level 1. But with that being said, though, if you want to, yes, eventually they will update. Anybody with CUI will get the change to R3 for 171, as well as using the alpha version 3. So if you wanted to use them, I'm not telling anybody don't use them. You could start prepping now. You're probably looking at some time before all those implementations go that way. But if you ever have a question, you could email us. But most of the time, we get our answers out of the CMMC assessment guide for level 1 or level 2, and then we go straight to the 171 alpha. Again, Joe already hit this, so I won't go over it. It's just there in case. But the September class is going to be a CCP plus, where we will talk implementation after we get through the assessment portion. So kind of like a mix, but more focused on OSCs and the implementers and those people in you or your staff. So you can actually focus on what the assessor is going to be looking at and how you should be doing it. All right, questions. As I was saying, we always have Lewis on call if nobody else has questions.
Always has questions. They always count on.
Mike, a little off topic, but we just became aware of a memo the other day that kind of enhances the NSPM 33 and the chip, with the chip regulation and everything. Any comments on that with relation to this?
I guess I would say out of a couple. So it's not just a chip. I think I sent it to Joe or somebody else. We have multiple requirements in this presidential executive order to upgrade the cybersecurity, and that's one of them. China manufacturers, it got tagged in there again. That's been forever, but now they're actually mandating hey, it's been 2 years. What are you guys doing? So every agency has to push back and say, okay, this is what we did to implement it. So you will be seeing more letters based around the cybersecurity practices, the chip, where you buy stuff from, those banned entities, they're going to be a big one being pushed. If you haven't already gotten them, just expect it either on your renewal or when your contract officer gets to it, or the agency responsible for your contracts. The other one that's been being pushed out pretty regularly over the last 2 or 3 weeks is incident response procedures and making sure you have a process in place, since that is on that list as well. And we also know that the CFAR got updated magically and allowed contract officers to do some retroactive steps for their incident response.
Tina just posted a link to the guide. Thank you, Tina, in the chat. Those who haven't seen it yet. I have a couple of comments just to kind of put out there as people are going through. The first one, I want to make sure everyone knows that multi-factor authentication is supported in the Catapult. We haven't turned on enforcement of it when you sign in, but that's coming very soon. If anyone had a question about that. One thing I get a lot of questions on is, and we see a lot of people doing, is I almost want to say overthinking some of the groupings and the access control. Yes, it's pretty detailed and there is a lot there, but I have to remind people we are still seeing people regularly where you walk into the machine shop or you walk into the lab and everybody has the same permissions across the entire organization. So I have to remind people the bar is kind of low in some cases. So when it seems like, hey, this is a simple thing, maybe we've been doing for years. We already put people in groups. Is this something else? No, you're doing the right thing. That you're on the right track. And we just want to make sure you keep doing that and you're documenting that. And that's all there. We've seen people, everybody was an admin. I'm sorry to say that I see that all too regularly. It's a bad day for them. There was a comment about the review, the publicly reviewable practice, reviewing what people are posting. I see this very common split between companies where first people see that and they're like, oh, this is really onerous. Why are we having to do that? Versus the companies that have gotten slapped for posting something they shouldn't have. Like, oh, yeah, I know why that's there. We had an incident a little while ago. That's what they're trying to prevent. Somebody put something out either on their website or in a news. Usually it's a news release. Somebody got overly excited about putting something in there that they shouldn't have. That shouldn't have been part of that piece there. So that's why it's there. And Louis, you had mentioned something about review, and I think that kind of gets to the objective E. I didn't want to miss that one either, that they do have some sort of process to go back and review, right, Mike, on some sort of basis that you have somebody kind of not just the regular approval process, but there is some sort of look back that you're discovering that somebody, whatever your policy is, whatever your procedure is, whether it's once a year or once a quarter, somebody's going back and kind of, hey, let's just make sure our website, nothing's stuck through the cracks.
So, yeah, just to make sure I understood, which I believe I did, what Mike said is when we're looking at D, which is content on publicly accessible systems is reviewed to ensure it does not include FCI, that is only systems that we actually have control of. It's not, for example, Facebook or, whatever, Instagram, whatever someone may post on. It's on the systems that we have processes and procedures for publicly posting.
No. So
yeah,
even
please.
Your social media, I always ask this question: if you allow postings social media, do you have a process
organizationally controlled? Okay.
Yeah, we're not going to look at everybody else's. We would assume that that's why I said like your AUP or something is going to cover at the user level. If they accidentally post something, you would have a reprimand and have it removed. The other thing is, we're just in that review process, you should have procedures to remove it. And going to Louis, to your point, if something got posted, let's say on a public facing website, but you don't actually manage it, it's a third party service, there should be a process. Who do I contact? How does it get removed? What kind of email verification? Because a lot of those services are not just going to delete something because, Louis or Mike sent them an email. It only has to go to the account manager or whoever established that service with them, but there's normally a process to remove, certain things if you have a webmaster or you have somebody else managing your websites. But yeah, if it's internally we would expect that there's a ticket, it goes to whoever in IT and they would remove it from the website. And I know it does happen a lot, like Joe said, it is big. And the other thing is, for those people that want to push back on you, just search DOJ and current court cases. That's how they figure out once the whistleblowers get there. I mean, that's the first things out of their mouths. It's like, oh yeah, we already knew because it was on this website. And it's like, yeah, because nobody was actually reviewing them. So
a couple of our clients have actually gone and had these are folks with level 2. They've had their marketing folks or whoever's in charge of approving content go take the CUI training through the DoD. So you can document that not only these are the approvers, but they have gone through this is what I have, this is what I can't, or some contract training, so they understand when there's what the release schedule is there. They can do that or no, but it's a good way to kind of back up that. And it actually came up in one of our joint surveillance assessments. They actually asked that. So you have these marketing people, you're tasking them with approving this. How do they know what's allowed and what's not? And they're able to draw a line back to that training.
I want to follow up on that, though, a little bit, because it's my understanding from conversations with our compliance officers and through, our workshop that we had at EDUCAUSE that the scoping of FCI is not as clear as it is for CUI. So there could be situations where the ambiguity of what is FCI and is not FCI could cause an organization the size of the University of Michigan difficulty. How is that best navigated?
I think this is a hard one depending on your contracts, but that's why I threw in there most of the time stuff that you cannot post is going to have a distribution statement right on it, D through one of them. It's I think most of us are used to seeing those. So that should be the instant stop. For FCI at a university, you are probably correct. There's probably a lot you are allowed to share just because it's research. The difference is having that training like Joe's talking about, where those people that have to review it actually know, which could be like a 50-50. I know even after the national defense whole giant, page after page, it does list in there that there will eventually be training on FCI and CUI for all tiers. But I think until then, you're really not going to see too much change from, contracting officers or anybody actually labeling it or putting a distribution statement, unless they are one of those restrictive agencies or departments within the DoD where they constantly do it. They always have a distribution statement on, and they do it by page, or they do it, the whole contract. You're still probably going to see the same thing probably till 2026, 2027. So I'm not saying it's on you or your organization to train that person so they know, but I would say between the contracting officer, the person actually getting the contract and looking at it, they should know what, and they should be kind of going through it. And then I normally like to go to program managers, somebody within your organization, or project managers that are using that data, have seen it for years, and they do know which pages are labeled like that, or if it's not. And then if you're like one of the other 90% of the defense industrial base where we still don't know, you can always reach back out to us. I have no problem reaching out to one of the contracting officers or PMs and actually start. I think that's one of the biggest keys is getting you to the right person so they can say, oh, hold on. Yeah, let me go back and either tell your prime, or I'll go and revise this document for you. And they will actually give you the data guidance.
So what I'm
forcing.
Yeah. We're getting a lot of the basic safeguarding right now, and the FCI, we can't get any clear information from the funding agencies or the contracting officers. What I'm hearing, Mike, is likely DoD will have, because they're more mature in this process, will have more clarification that they provide if needed.
Yeah, down the road, you're going to see that there a contract, it doesn't matter what it is, won't be able to go out without some way, shape, or form. But in the DoD's mind, everything you get for the contract is FCI. It doesn't matter what data it is. So that's the key. The problem with FCI is like almost anybody can see it unless it has a distribution statement on it. There's really nothing, kind of stopping you. That's the key. It's just like CUI. It is controlled, but if there was no distribution statements on it, it's shareable. You could share it to subs, anything else, as long as it doesn't have certain distribution statements. It just kind of stay contracting side of the house.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, I can't wait until the training gets updated with DAU. It would be such a great day. And Louis, I don't know if I answered this like probably 100%, but you did have one about service accounts. How do I associate them?
Do you need to make that same association that I saw in that you had a table there?
I might have had mine in there, but I always tell people, if you label the service accounts and like say you do service, like your abbreviation for a service account, whatever it does. So it could be something you use for a third-party app, and you want to keep it like in the naming convention so you know exactly what the service account does. And then we would expect to see, what kind of access. But you could do the same thing. We are not going to be picky as long as you have an identification process and you know what those service accounts are that have access to FCI or CUI.
We only have 2 minutes, so if nobody else has a question, I'll fill up the time. All right. I heard the conversation that Joe mentioned about privileged accounts. When you're having privileged accounts, if you have a process for granting administrative or privileged accounts to users, even though you may need, for example, in a research environment, 90 people may need to have administrative accounts as a business case, or a privileged account for a business case usage, that would be acceptable. It's because it's not default granting. You have a business case and you have an exception process. And
yeah, because in your case, or in a major university, or even a giant prime DIB, we would expect that there could be like 100 people with privileged accounts. They have some kind of access outside the norm.
Yeah.
As long as it's defined in your policies and you have a process for it, that's all we're going to look at. It's where you go to like a small organization, they have 90 people, and all 90 people are privileged users. That's what we're trying to get away from.
Okay, thank you.
As long as it's documented, and we run into this with even some machine shops on the local workstations where, and then we walk in, everybody's still a local admin on their workstation. We have that conversation about, well, do they need it? And it turns out there are some that still do. some of these guys, they have an older CAD software or something and it doesn't update, it doesn't operate. They're trying to get the newer one, but it doesn't work. Fine. You've documented it, the approval's there, the board is aware, the leadership is aware of it, and everybody else, though, has been removed. So you've actually gone through, that's what this whole CMMC, the reason we're in the game is because it's not this kind of hardcore audit. It's an assessment and it's process, You want to know, right? Have you thought, are you aware of this and have you thought it through? And the answer is yes. It's like, great, moving on. We get to go through it that way.
I'm glad you brought that one up. That this is probably a good one before we break. But when you're looking at those accounts, it doesn't matter who it is and what privilege. So like those local admins, the standard, if I read your SSP, should say we do not allow local admin accounts. And then you can put the however, there are exceptions to this policy, see this. And then we would expect to see that exception was approved by the data owner or the CEO or somebody high enough that is in charge, that signed the SSP or signed your policy, that they are allowing exceptions to the policy because that developer or whoever it is does need to have that access. It makes the assessment go so much easier when you have it set up like that. I just think a lot of people don't understand what exceptions are really for, because most developers want an exception to every control you can put in place.
Sure. Right. We're right at time. Well, we might actually end on time today. Does anyone have any last minute questions?
Thank you guys. You were recording this and you were going to post them. Is it on the website? I didn't find it real quick or easy.
There is a link in the CyberMD page to the YouTube forum that they're all up on the YouTube. And I was realizing, actually, as we were going through this, I don't know that we've actually gone back, Mike, and emailed everybody with slides and notes and things like that. So we'll put together a master list of everybody who's been over these for the last 3 or 4 sessions, make sure they get a PDF of the different slides and the links of the things, so that we'll pull all that together. It's summer in Maine. It gets tough.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Fantastic. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us today. And we'll hopefully see you next month. It'll be more practices. We're trying to figure out which ones.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you all.